This is the myth, and this is a common myth I hear on a pretty regular basis. And this myth is that a low-fat diet is good for you, and consuming saturated fats like cholesterol increases your chance of heart disease. And this is an absolute myth. It's unscientific, it's unproven, it is complete nonsense. It is a myth. So let's look at some of the information. The first outbreak of heart attacks occurred in the 1920s and was linked to the hydrogenation of fats and oils. That process where we said about the trans fats, where you pump it full of hydrogen and all that sort of stuff. And you take these fragile omega-6s and you straighten them up and you make them last forever and look lovely in a jar. That's that process, and that's what it was linked to. And like I say, prior to the 1920s, heart attacks were rare, and also things like cancer, autoimmune, and degenerative diseases were rare. And if you go back, my grandparents here, they ate a lot of fat, a lot of saturated fat, and heart disease was rare. I mean, if you know people of that generation. Prior to the 1920s, heart disease was extremely rare, and you can diagnose an autopsy. You know, sometimes you diagnose late, but you can still diagnose it, as well as cancer, autoimmune, and degenerative diseases. Now, by the 1950s, so just 30 years later, heart disease had risen to 40% of all deaths, going from rare to almost half the population going to die of a heart attack. Now, the belief put forward predominantly by the vegetable oil industry, who funded, oh God, I can't remember his name now, basically funded one of the main researchers who really put this proponent forwards, and they was, so obviously by the vegetable oil industry, it's a little bit biased, but they said it was due to an increased consumption of animal fats, and we should switch to a low-fat, high-carbohydrate, grain-based diet. So that's an interesting thing to hear. So let's look at what actually happened. Was fat really the cause? You know, from the 1920s upwards, where we're eating so much more fat? Well, no, it wasn't the cause, because the research shows consumption of animal fats decreased rapidly. Huge reduction. Butter decreased from 18 pounds per person per year to just 4 pounds. Huge reductions as per person per year. In the last 80 years, consumption of your hydrogenated vegetable oils, which contains the trans fats, has increased by 400%. And sugar and processed foods have increased by 60%. And I think that probably number's gone up. So, if dietary fat is the villain, why has the consumption patterns gone in the reverse direction? You know, the time when heart disease was rare, we consumed a lot of fat. A hell of a lot of fat. Like you say, butter, lard, dripping. As I said, the only bad bit was actually with the bread and the sugar. But we had a lot of this. You know, people cooked in lard. That's what people used to cook with, particularly in this country. You know, different countries, tropical, you had a lot of palm oil and, you know, ghee for Indian cooking and things like that. I mean, there's some studies which actually compare North and South India and look at the fat consumptions and get completely different rates of heart disease. It's quite fascinating. But, as I said, if fat consumption is causing all this heart disease, and it's risen rapidly, that cannot be because the consumption of fats has dropped rapidly. If we are consuming now less fat than we ever have in recorded history, we should have no heart disease. It should be extremely rare. And we are consuming the least amount we ever have. However, our amounts of vegetable oils and all your processed foods and your sugars has gone up significantly. So as I said, if the consumption pattern's in the wrong direction, it cannot be the cause. Just simple common sense. So regardless of what a research says, if you're not eating the stuff, it can't be causing it.